Thank you very much for the invitation. I got a great honor to make this presentation. And at the very beginning, I would like to emphasize that our presentation probably will be complementary and very similar to a certain extent. And from one hand, it may be a coincidence because we were not trying to adjust our presentation, I mean Bartek and mine. But from the other hand, more or less, we are discussing the same issue on our seminars, so that's why we are talking about the very similar problems. Well, the topic of the lecture is epistemic and cognitive concept of explanation, and it, I believe, underlines that we have the different concept of explanation, which is quite obvious after the several lectures that we were able to listen to. So the main task for me is to explain what I understand under the term epistemic and what I understand under the term cognitive concept of explanation. And then at the end of the lecture, I will try to make a synthesis of both this concept of explanation, which is my original idea. I was a little bit afraid that it's trivial, but Bartek, who looks at the slides, told me that maybe it's not, and you will have an opportunity to judge it. Okay, I start from the few proposals of classification which exist in the literature regarding the concept of explanations. One of the classification was proposed by Myers, and it's very easy to be found in the internet because it's one of the articles which is very often cited by the various philosophers. What Myers proposed, he distinguished causal realism, constructive empiricism, ordinary language philosophy, cognitive approach, and naturalistic approach. Causal realism was never mentioned during our conference, and I think that it's very important because most of the philosophers, especially from United States and England, they are bound to the causal realism. So simply speaking, they claim that to explain something means to indicate a cause. And this is an approach which is totally different from we had several times during the conference. So this Hempelian model, which in fact is syntactic, which presents that to explain something is a kind of reasoning. Constructive empiricism and ordinary language philosophy is an example of epistemic approach in my understanding. Constructive empiricism is Bas van Frassen, and probably most of you know more or less what the conception is about. Ordinary language philosophy is attributed to Achenstein. Cognitive approach is something different, and I will tell you something more about what was understood by Myers under the term of cognitive approach. And naturalistic approach explanation, implication to the best explanation is something that we have just heard what Bartek was talking about. Another example of the classification is the classification of the nature of theories according to Taggart. And one important remark from the beginning. This what we have on the slide is the classification of the theories. But in fact, the underlying concept is that to explain something is to build the theory. So when we have the theory, it means that we can explain some phenomena which we intend to explain. And when we know the nature of the theory, the ontological nature of the theory, then we can say what concept of explanation, in fact, we are employing in order to explain certain phenomena. And Taggart distinguishes this syntactic approach, semantic approach, and pragmatic approach. Bartek has just said before a moment that he believes that all the theories, in fact, can be reduced to the syntactic. I'm not very much convinced about that, but we can say that syntactic approach to the theories is that it's a belief that scientific theories are only the syntactic structure, the set of sentences given an axiomatic formalization in a logical system. In semantic approach, normally the example of the semantic approach is the set theoretical conception, and I will tell a little bit more about this semantic approach. The theories are interpreted in terms of sets of models. And the pragmatic approach, under the pragmatic approach, we have a set of various approaches. Generally speaking, we are more focused on what the theories are really are in the practice of the scientists. And theories are the devices used by scientists in particular context. A few examples will clarify the issue. According to Taggart, for instance, the Kuhn example of the philosophy of science is the pragmatic approach. The similar situation we have in case of Lakatos, but also all of the cognitive approach to the explanation are pragmatic, because we merely focus on what's going on in the mind of the scientist when he's trying to explain certain phenomena. So what is the epistemic concept of explanation in my understanding? First, explaining is not reduced to selective reasoning aimed at particular phenomena. So it's not simply the reasoning like in the Hempelian model. It is rather aimed at formulating a theory which would explain the observed phenomena. So when I'm thinking about the epistemic concept of explanation, I am very close to the view that to explain something means to construct the theory. The epistemic concept of explanation makes abstraction from any real truth. So it's in a total opposition to the realistic view. When we are thinking about the epistemic concept of explanation, we don't need to indicate a cause or any real process, any true real process which happened in the reality. Of course, it does not mean that the outer world plays no role in our concept of explanation, but this outer world, these real truths, are either by assumption inaccessible or they are of no relevance from this point of view. Experience takes important part in explanations. I think that we all agree about that. There are some discussions about the prediction power of the certain concept of explanation. In a process of explaining, there must be a room for setting our common sensory data against explanatory theory. So that is something that I can call predictive power or empirical adequacy. Experience can be structured in a various way. The concept of explanation must include the criteria for choosing the best order. That's exactly what Bartek was talking before a moment. So when we are thinking about the several possible explanations, several hypotheses, or in my terms, several theories, we must have the criteria how to choose the best order, how to choose the best theory. So it simply means that to a certain extent, this approach to the explanation is normative, because if we indicate the criteria how to choose the best theory, in fact we construct the norms which with theory should be chosen. Explanation in this approach is a social undertaking. It takes place in the discourse between the members of the society. It seems obvious, but it not seems obvious if we take into account the cognitive approach, which is merely focused on what is going in the mind of the particular human or scientist. And the examples of these epistemic concepts are the set-theoretic conception of Steckmiller-Sneed, the conception of Van Frassen, and unificationist account of Kitcher. Let me go further. One of the example, Kitcher unificationist account. It's quite complex, and I don't think that we have enough time to go into details about this unificationist account. But briefly speaking, according to Kitcher, scientific explanation is a matter of providing a unified account of range of different phenomena. And this range of different phenomena in this unified account is called by Kitcher an explanatory store. The fundamental task of a theory of explanation is to specify the condition of the explanatory store. And then we have the set of the notions which were introduced originally by Kitcher, like an argument pattern, which is an ordered triple consisting of a schematic argument. The schematic argument is the sequences of schematic sentence, and the third part of this triple in argument pattern is the set of sets of filling instructions. Filling instructions instruct how to replace the terms in sentences with dummy letters. And then we have the classification of the schematic arguments, which describe which sentence the schematic arguments are premises and conclusions and what rules of inference are used. I understand that it can be a little bit complicated, but what is the most important is that when the underlying idea here is that if the theory is more unified in this understanding, it means that the theory is simply better. And at the end, the Kitchers say that the argument pattern, so this pattern of explanation is better if it is more stringent, if it imposes more restrictions. The aim of explanation is to deploy as few as possible and as stringent as possible argument patterns. So the less argument patterns we have, the better theory we have. At the end of the day, we can say that, and it's a very colloquial understanding, if the theory is simpler, the theory is better. So that's the concept of Keecher. Another example of the epistemic concept of explanation is set theoretical conception. What is the theory according to the set theoretical conception? The theory is a structure that picks a class of M models out of a class of possible models MP. When in this example we are talking about models, we are talking about models in sense of Tarski. So we have the set of sentences, we have the inference rule, we have the relations, we have the functions, and we have the function of interpretations which will transform the model into another set of sentences. And thus, in this understanding, the theory is of structure which consists of two elements K and I. K is said to be the core of the theory, consisting of the pair model and possible models, such that M is a subset of MP. So any model that we apply is in fact one of the possible models which can be which exist within this structure. And I is the set of models that are intended application of the theory, with I a subset of MP. I know that it's still a little bit complicated, but what is the most important is that, in fact, we have the set of models, the very different models. Some of models are the potential models. Some of them are the models which we currently apply as a structure which intends to explain the certain phenomena, and some of the models are the intended application of the theory. But at the end of the day, we have only the sets of models which interact with one another. The important element of the conception is the classification of objects which fall or not under the predefined predicates. So if we have the models, the important element is how to classify the certain elements which fall or not fall under the particular model. The theory in this understanding cannot be said to be true or false, but it can be confronted with the empirical data, and we have certain criterion where we can say that one theory is better than another theory. What is cognitive concept of explanation? Well, the cognitive approach focuses on real processes that happen in a human mind. So explanation, explanation is the real cognitive process which emerge on cognitive human apparatus. There is a lot of cognitive approaches in explanation, but we can distinguish at least two subsets of these approaches. The psychological approach, which makes use of the achievements of cognitive psychology. The very important element which distinguishes the psychological approach is that we meet the typically psychological notions, like, for instance, understanding, like emotions, like I don't have any other example. And we have then the computational approach, which is a little bit different. So the scientists who would like to envisage the cognitive concept of explanation in computational terms, they are trying to model the cognitive process such as if it were computational. So briefly speaking, they assume that our human mind is something like a computer, and we can model our human mind in the similar way like we can write the computer program. And this is the citation from Myers, which is strongly opposed to such an approach, and Myers supports the realistic approach, and he says that in fact the explanation is indication of the cause. The simple philosophical question, what is explanation, is not well formed in this approach, of course. If we accept some form of epistemic relativity, the proper form of such a question is always what is explanation in cognitive system as. Hence, doubts about the significance of explanatory cognition in some system S are best expressed as doubts about whether system S-type explanation models human cognition accurately enough to have any real significance for human being. Let me focus on another example of the cognitive approach, which is the most, which I like the most, in fact, this is an example of the conception of Hayek. This is the very old conception in contemporary terms, because originally his book, The Sensory Order, was written in 1952, and it looks a little bit outdated. At that time, the knowledge about the cognitive process in human mind was very poor. So from this perspective, Hayek appears to be a really precursor of this theory. I think that most of the assumptions that are listed on this slide sounds obvious for us, because we now have deep knowledge about how our brain really works. But in 1952, it was not so obvious, not among the philosophers, and Hayek was not the neurologist, but was in fact a philosopher. So ontologically, the world consists of the physical processes, which is called by Hayek physical order, cognitive apparatus, the neural order, neurons, synapses, and physicochemical processes, and is a subset of the physical reality. And then we have the mental order, the order of sensation, which constitutes the sensory qualities, representations which we perceive. So once again, because it is an important part of the theory, Hayek said, in fact, we have three levels of order. We have the physical order, we have the neural order, which is subset of the physical order, because our brain is in fact the subset of the physical aspect of the reality. And on the basis of our neural order, emerged the mental order. A mental order is something that we can, in the contemporary terms of philosophy of mind, say that it creates something like qualia. So the pictures that we, the presentations that we perceive. The neural and mental order are isomorphic, but the physical order is not isomorphic with them. So that is another important assumption within this theory. So briefly speaking, the way how our neurons are interconnected with each other, they determine our representations, so our mental order. But this neural order is not isomorphic with the physical order. So we have something different in the outer sphere, but this outer field is somehow modeled by the sensory order, but not perfectly, so it's not isomorphic. The main function of the neural order is to discriminate and classify the sensations coming from the physical order. This is done on the lowest level by the neuron. This conception is in fact very simple. So the only task of the particular neuron is to discriminate the sensations, the impulses which comes from the outer, from the physical world. Only those sensations can be classified on which neurons are sensitive. That also sounds very obvious. The sensitivity is partially predefined biologically and can be developed. This is something that we know now, that the neural order, that our neurons and the system of our brain is to a certain extent flexible. So what we have when we are born is then restructured somehow, and the biologists and neurologists knows about it very well. But the range of this restructuring, the range of this development is in fact very limited, because we cannot restructure the whole connections. They are partially predefined biologically, and we will never exceed this certain range of limitation. But there's also another element which is very important. So this restructuring can be done by the regular and repetitive stimulation of the neuron. So it means that only when we have the impulses which are regular and which are repetitive, they can be perceived by the neuron, they can be selected, discriminated by the neuron. If the impulses are not enough regular or are not repetitive, so the neurons will be blind. They will be completely invisible for them, which may imply that there is a certain area of the outer reality which is never perceived by our sensory order, because if this area is not regular enough, has not this level of regularity, it will not be discriminated and classified within the system. And another important element is the map. By the development of the neural connections, the system creates the map, which imperfectly reflects the regular relations occurred in the outer world. The map is in fact the set of the instructions, which are encoded on the biological level. And what we have, but on the basis of this map, of the set of instruction, emerge the model. Model approximately in Tarski sense. So map means the set of instruction, But this set of instruction in the neural order is dynamic and subject to constant reconstruction. So Hayek called it semi-permanent network of interconnection. The map is a foundation for the abstract model which emerges in the system, but there are two important features. The model may disclose its inconsistency. So it's not that if we have according to Tarski, when we are talking about model, about the set of sentences, there is an assumption that the set of sentences cannot be contradictory. And in the model which Hayek is talking about, he says that it's quite a normal thing that the model can be partially inconsistent. There can appear certain contradictions in the model, and therefore the model is permanently tested. It creates predictions about the future sensation. If contradiction is found, the system looks for the solution. It's restructuring the map. So we have the dynamical process, the dynamical interactions, the model and the outer world, and if the contradiction is found, so the model do not reflect the outer world perfectly, then he's trying to remodel this interconnection. He's constantly looking for the consistency. Certain level of the regularity in the stimuli is required to evoke the neural impulse. That's something that I already taught, and the system is blind for the irregular stimuli. And another feature which is important, the map, the system of classification, is previous to the sensation. So we can't have at first the sensation and then try to categorize the sensation in the model, because in order to perceive the sensation, we need to have a certain system of classification. So Hayek called it the primacy of the abstract. So first we have instructions, and then we can have the perception, and not the other way around, which was very close to the view of empiricists. They claim that we first have the perception, and then we are trying to build the theory up on the perception. It's the completely different approach. And at the end, we have the definition, what is explanation in this understanding? Explanation consists in the formation in the brain of a model, of a complex of events to be explained. A model, the parts of which are defined by their position in a more comprehensive structure of relationships, which constitutes the semi-permanent framework from which the representation of individual events receive their meaning. So, briefly speaking, explanation is formation a model, is a construction a model. Something very similar to the epistemic concept of the explanation. In a set theoretical approach to the explanation, we have the similar definition of explanation. Explanation means creation of the model. And that's exactly the basis of my synthesis. So I think that we have the very similarity between the cognitive approach in terms of Hayek and epistemic approach in terms of Kitcher or in terms of Stackmiller. So let me go further and attempt at synthesis. Few preceding remarks before I start to present the table with the synthesis. Epistemic and cognitive concept of explanation are both pragmatic. When I'm thinking of a concept to be pragmatic, I mean that we merely focus on how we really explain the word. So the normative aspects of the explanation, even if it's present in the concept, it plays the secondary role. It's not on the foreground, but rather in the background. So, firstly, and what is the most important, we should look on the humans. We should focus on the humans, on the human brain or the human activity, and upon that decide what kind of explanation we really find attractive, important, valid. And then, on the basis of the pragmatic knowledge, we try to reconstruct what we really do when we explain the word. Both concepts abstract from any ontological truth. We are not looking for this truth. It's not that the problem that the truth is not interesting, but both concepts, they assume that this truth is normally inaccessible. Because when we explain the word by building the models, the only access that we have is to compare the models and find the criteria how to compare the competing models. It does not mean that there is no correspondence to reality, but in both there is a tolerance for its imperfectness. Explaining is an unended quest. I believe that this phrase has already been used during the conference, unended quest. It is in fact unended quest. and we tolerate that there is that our cognition, in fact, or our explanation is imperfect. 5 minutes? So let's go to the conclusions, if it's only 5 minutes. Okay, so there is a few similarities which I observed in both approaches, an epistemic account and cognitive account. The first is that in both accounts, the consistency plays an important role. So when we start to explain something, we start from either from the new observables in the epistemic account or from the new sensations. And when we have these observables, we try to place these observables or sensations within the existing model. If we find that something is inconsistent, so then we are looking for restructuring the model. So that's the first level of similarity. The another level is that when we are looking for the criteria, how to compare the competing models, we often meet the notions of complexity, or notions of simplicity, or notions of unifications, like in Kitcher accounts. I think that they are more or less the same. And we have the same notions in cognitive account in terms of Hayek. But I would not say that we are looking for the simplicity. We are rather looking for the model which is efficient, which is energy efficient, because our brain is a horrible energy consumer. So it's better for the interconnections between the neurons to be less energy consumer. And we will have to consume less energy when the connections are structured in a better way. If you look on these both levels of similarity, you will simply notice that it's something like a coherency, but it's reduced only to the consistency and simplicity. And in an account which was presented by Bartek, there was also the inference rules, which are important part of the coherency. Complexity is important in both approaches, so in epistemic and in cognitive approach. But the definition of the complexity in both approaches, I think, should be different. So in case we are thinking about the explanation as the intersubjective process which emerges during the discussion between the scientists, we use the notion of complexity in terms of algorithmic information content. So briefly speaking, the shortest computer program that could generate a complete description of an object. And in case of the cognitive approach, we have to engage also the energy. So I found that the better definition would be the thermodynamic depth. So what we need is the resources, total amount of resources of thermodynamics and informational resources. Okay, and because we have only the few minutes, I think that the last few slides are the pictures, which I like very much because I did it by myself. I think that the most important element of the synthesis is something which I call the feedback loop. So these two concepts of explanations, they interact with one another. These circles, if you notice, are the human brains. So in human brains, we create the mental order, the models. On the very low level, we have the map, the neural order. And we present to the outer world, to the room like this, we present our models, our possible models. MP, I use the terminology from the set theoretical construction. And then what's going on the level of epistemic concept of explanation is the brainstorm. So the contest of possible models, because we have the presentation of possible models from another human being, MP1, or possible models from another scientist, MP2. And then we have the contest of possible models, and we are trying to construct a theory. A theory is the main tool of explanation. And the effect of the theory, if we agree, of course, at the end of the conference, is the derivative model MD. And if the derivative model is perceived by my mind on the basis of the sensations which I perceived in the neural order, so then the new derivative model modified my mental order and modified my map on the level of neurons. So this is something like a feedback loop. But it has also another dimension. So what's going on in this room is that we very often refer to the theory under construction. So when we discuss the issue which we don't have a theory at hand, which we can present, we are trying to construct the theory, but we do it on the basis of background knowledge. And sometimes it's the last slide. And sometimes we have to verify this background knowledge in order to find the best possible theory. I believe that something very similar happens in our brains. And I refer to the division which was presented by Kahneman in his last book, that in our brains exist two systems, the system 1 and system 2. The system 2 is responsible for the cognitive efforts. So when we have to think something very deeply, think it over, so then we deploy the system 2. But we also have the system 1, which consists of patterns which are ready to be used, automatically generated heuristics. Sometimes we have to restructure the system 1. And this is very similar to what we have to do with our background knowledge. That's another dimension of this feedback loop. Thank you very much.